This is a wacky bare-bones tour of the GigRack sound system. The GigRack comes in a very protective hard-shelled case. To unpack it, we release the strap, pull the lid off, and inside we find elastic bands that are holding the cables that we need for setting up the system. There will be a cable there for connecting to your computer as well as the power cord. Once unpacked, we can begin making connections to the GigRack. In the back, you'll find the location for connecting the power cord as well as jacks for the left and right speakers. Our speakers use 1/4-inch jacks which go into the holes shown. Finally, there is the on-off button in the back. All the other connections are made in the front of the board. Here's a quick overview of the main components on the front of the mixer. Here are the input jacks. This area are the channel strips. The signal goes from the individual channels as it gets mixed and then goes over to the main equalizer section. From the equalizer, it goes into the effects section. From the effects, it goes over to this very important dial, the master volume control. There are two buttons above the master volume control. The top one is the phantom power, and it should, in our application, always be turned off. The light should not be shining. And the one below it is the selection of the output, and it should always be extended and not pushed in. Additional default settings include the equalizer being flatlined or set at 0 for both monitor and main, as shown here, and the effects should be turned off, meaning that the red light should not be on. With the effects turned off, it doesn't matter where the dial is turned, so you can turn it so the blue light is at the bottom and out of your line of sight. There are 8 input jacks for the 8 channels that are on the GigRack. Here I'm using a microphone cord to connect in a mic to channel 1. The connector is also called an XLR. Each of these input jacks have a hole in the center that can accept a 1/4-inch mono jack. Next, I'm going to connect in an iPod type of device. In this case, I'm connecting through the headphone jack, which accepts a 1/8-inch pin, and on the other end it has RCA jacks, which breaks into a right and a left side. On the GigRack, there are 2 places for RCA jacks, channels 5 and 6. I'm now going to describe the dials that are associated with each of the individual channels. The first 3 are the equalizer, high, medium, low, in that order. You always start with those at 12 o'clock and adjust them slightly to get better sound. Typically with men's voices you want to take out some bass, and typically with women's voices you want to take out some highs. The dial below the equalizers is the effects dial. That should always be turned down to 0. And then next is the pan dial, which shifts the sound from the left and right speakers, and that should always be up at 12 o'clock. That's followed by the gray dial, which is the monitor, and that should always be set to 0. And finally we've got the master volume, which is the red dial, and that should be adjusted depending on how you wish the mix to sound. When you're adjusting the knobs in an individual channel, you're only affecting the sound quality associated with that one channel. That allows you to adjust each channel to get the optimum quality sound you can from each of the inputs. Now that we've made all the connections we think we're going to make, we're going to turn on the system. First thing you do before turning on the system is make sure that the volumes on each of the individual channels have been turned down to 0, and that the master volume and the monitor volumes are turned to 0. Once that's done, we can turn the power on, which is a button in the back. Now the system is up and running, and in order to test it, we need to turn the master volume up a little bit, and for this mic channel, for example, we're going to turn its volume up a little bit and then tap on the mic to see that we have sound coming out of the speakers. You, as the sound person, have to decide on each channel what a good EQ mix is. Always start with everything kind of at 12 o'clock in neutral, and then if you have time during a live performance, especially during rehearsals, you can experiment some and decide what the best EQ is for the individual voices and guitars and keyboards, and try to tune it up in that way if you can. One of the ways I think of this is that the sound comes in, it trickles through the channels till it finally hits the volume control of the individual channel, and then these 8 channels all flow over in this direction to the main mix. If I have a microphone and a guitar, I probably want those to be balanced. And so what I want to do is I want to adjust the volumes on these 2 channels. This has been a wacky bare bones education for the GigRack. Take a look at the full version on my website to get a better understanding of the settings I've described here.